Hello and welcome once again. Now we're continuing our study of cases, and we're going to talk about one of the other situations where we do need to use case. So everything we're going to talk about here today is stuff that you will use all the time. So we talked before about plurals. Now we're going to talk about the dual. So you've already seen the dual. You've been exposed to this. You know, in Arabic we have this special situation of the dual. So now we have to talk about how this is affected by case. So our goal today, as you would expect, is to recognize the cases of the dual and to use it properly. And it's pretty simple. You know what I'm going to tell you, right? Yes, if you learn the stuff from last time, if you learn the stuff about the human plurals, then this will be very simple. If not, then you should go back and do it because it's going to be hard. So let's review. These are our basics from the case, right? This is the very first thing we learn. We have three cases: subject, object, and then after the preposition. And we associate these with these vowels, u, a, and e. Now, as with the plural, we're only going to use two of these, but it's going to be different than what we used last time. So, this is what we did with the human plurals. Remember, the subject case was un, which we would expect. The preposition case was in, which you would also expect. But the object case, remember, we couldn't use an, which we're going to see why. So we use the same case for these two. Now this rule is going to hold today. This is going to be true of the dual also. So you want to put these two cases together. Everything other than the subject case, right? So these two cases go together, and this case stands beside itself. But the difference here is, okay, we are used to seeing the an, right? We taught you first to associate this ending an with the dual. Kelban is two dogs, Beitan, two houses, Sayaratan, and so forth. Well, that's true, but in reality that is the subject case. Okay, so when we talk about Kelban, they are as a subject. Okay. The other two cases, just like with the human plurals, these two are going to be the same. And you notice they look a lot alike, but notice the difference. Instead of een, this is ain. Remember this going way back to Aleph Ba. When you have this combination, the sukoon here, that's pronounced ain. So the difference is, instead of saying, you know, misri'in, we'll say misri'ain. But notice what is the same, okay? So we're still dividing them into subject case and then the other two cases. The difference, instead of using un, we're going to use an, which you're already used to for the dual. And instead of een, we use ain. Okay, so very simple. So let's look at some examples. Okay, there's some great stories about a kelb. Hunak kelb fi beiti. I hope everyone can say that. What kind of bait would it be without a kelb? Uheb el kelb kathiran. Of course. La'ebtu ma el kelb. And I hope you can say that every day. Okay, now, suppose one kelb is great, but let's have double kelbs. That's even better. Okay, simple. Hunak kelban fi beiti. There are two dogs in my house. Now, hopefully that number just keeps going up. Now, this is nothing new. You learned how to do this before, so right? No problem. But of course, this is why, because this is the subject case. There are two dogs in my house. What are they doing? They're being in my house. That is great. Okay, now let's look at the other two examples. Now, think about here. Uheb el kelb. What is the kelb here? Is it a subject? No, of course not. It is the object of my intense uhebbing. So, if I'm going to double those kelbs, what am I going to get? Right. Uheb el kelbain kathiran. I love the two dogs very much. And the same thing here. La'ebtu ma el kelbain. Why? Because it's after a preposition. Now, you probably very sharp, and you notice, well, wait a minute, those little short vowel markers in Sukoon aren't written in anyway, so isn't it going to be written just like this? And doesn't this ending without the vowels, the way it's normally written, doesn't this look exactly like the plural ending? Yes, you're right. So how can we tell the difference? Well, we know this is not the plural of kelb. Right? Remember, the plural of kelb is kelab. So if you see this, you know it's not kelbeen. It can't possibly be. Now, what if we had something like, let's say, instead of kelbs, let's say we have misriyun, misriyin, and so forth. Human plurals, human duals. Well, this again is going to be an instance where only the context will tell you. Now, no problem here, right? Hunaka Misriyan fi beiti. There are 2 Egyptians in my house right now. Not sure why, but they are. No problem. Misriyan means there's 2 of them. We don't need the number 2 ever mentioned here. If we said Misriyun, that means there's 3 or more. But notice this. Uheb al Misriyain kathir. Now here, right, you can't tell, because I haven't put the sukoon there. Is this misri'in or misri'ain? Well, the fact is, in reading, you can't tell. If someone is speaking, you will hear it and you will know. But in reading, you can't tell. Okay, so it is acceptable. Now notice this. Notice what I'm about to tell you. It is acceptable where clarification is needed to add the number after it. In this case, it's being added as an adjective modifying this. Notice this, right? Uheb al-misriyain al-ithnain. If you notice, the word ithnain is already in the dual, right? Because it's 2. So this is making clear that it's the 2 Egyptians. Now, here's the thing. Let's suppose this was all in one paragraph. Okay, it's a weird paragraph. But I told you, Hunaka Misriyan, you know there's 2. Well, here, this is fine by itself because you already know how many there are. Right? You already know how many there are here. If for some reason this were just a sentence by itself, it is acceptable to add the ithnain to clarify this. Okay, but notice it's being added here after the dual is a clarification. What is not acceptable is this. Okay, don't take that and then go ahead and do this, right? Uheb ithnain al-misri. This is not the way to make anything dual, right? Ameltu ma al-ithnain al-misri. Okay, this is not acceptable. That's not how we do it. Okay? But otherwise, it's pretty simple. Now, most of the cases, right, context is going to tell you, and if it doesn't, you wouldn't, you just have to figure it out. So far, this seems pretty simple, right? It follows the same rules and the same patterns as the human plurals. And remember, with the human plurals, we had a tricky rule. Well, the same tricky rule will apply here. Remember the tricky idafa rule. The noon drops out when in the dual is the first term in an idafa, like this. Okay, now let's take a look at some examples right here. Now all of these, you should be able to read these and figure out what they mean without any confusion. There should be no possible confusion if you know your grammar rules. If you haven't learned the grammar rules, then you would look at these sentences and be completely confused. And then if you had more sentences in the same text that were the same way, you'd get very confused, and after a while you just wouldn't know what's going on. This is why we have to know. So let's look at these examples. Okay, what do we have here? Mudira asharika yamalan kathiran. Well, right, director of the company works a lot. Well, how many directors? Well, first of all, this here is a clue. Yamalan means 2. 2 of them work. Here also, mudira. What on earth is this aleph doing here? Okay, it's not a feminine ending. That would be a tar mabuta. But why is it like this? Okay, this is obviously in an idafa. There is no al here. Director of the company. Okay, so this is an idafa. No, what happens? The noon drops out in an idafa. When you see a weird ending like this, rather than just writing it off, you know a noon has dropped out. So this mudira, right, is really the mudira that you see here, right, is really coming from mudiran. Right? If it just said mudiran, that would mean two directors. But it's in an idafa, so the two directors of the company, mudira asharika yamalan kathiran. There's no way you can confuse. It's not plural and it's not singular. This is not a singular word. Now let's look at this one. Now this one, okay, this one you could possibly mistake, but let's see what it says. Right? Arif ukhte el arus. Okay, I know sister the bride. Now you might look at this and say ukhti, I know my sister, right? But this doesn't work in an idafa, right? My sister of the bride doesn't work. So what we have here is, again, we know that a noon has dropped out because this is clearly an idafa. This is indefinite with this. This is an idafa, and we can tell by context it's talking about sisters of the bride. Right, but it's not akhawat. If there were three or more of them, if it was a big family, it would be akhawat al-arus. Here it's arif ukhtay al-arus. Yani this is ukhtain, two sisters of the arus, but the noon drops out. And lastly here, taqalamtu ma musa'day al-mudir. Again, you might look at this by itself and say, well, how do I know this is not my assistant, right? I talked with assistant of the director. How do I know that's not my assistant? Well, if all you can read is in individual words, okay, that's what you might think. I talked with my assistant, the director. That doesn't make any sense. My assistant is the director. I guess maybe if you're like the king or something like that. That doesn't make any sense. My assistant, the director. That doesn't make any sense. So what this is musa'adeh, because it's a dual, right? It's a dual going with in this idafa, right? So I talked to the assistants of the director, but the noon has dropped out. Okay, now let's look at something different here. Now, as we've told you before, you're familiar with these plural, this possessive suffixes, right? This is ha, meaning all of these are her. So we went from having regular idafas like this to now having possessives. And remember what we told you is that in these cases, with the possessive suffix, it is an idafa. When you say mudiraha, you're essentially saying the director of her director, her boss, essentially. Okay, so that would be no problem. If this just said mudiraha, that would be her boss, no problem. But notice what we have, mudiraha. Well, you know this aleph would not belong there if this were singular. So what is happening? Don't just write it off and say, I don't know where it came from. Well, what happens? In an idafa, the noon has dropped out. So imagine if there's an N here, mudiran, two bosses, ha, of her two bosses. But again, the noon drops out. Mudiraha, yamalan kathiran. And because you see the yamalan, that's also another clue that this is dual. Okay, look at this one. Arif ukhtaha. Now, if there were no ya, it would be Arif ukhtaha, I know her sister. Okay. If it was just ukhti, that would be I know my sister, a bit weird, but that would be there. But notice this obviously cannot be my sister, her. That doesn't make any sense. So what is this ya doing there? Well, the only way that would fit is if this were a dual. It can't be a plural because the plural of ukht is not ukhtain, right? It's akhwat. So this ukhtain, two sisters of her, but the noon drops out again. And let's look at this one. Taqalamtu ma musa'idayha. Okay, again, what did I do? I talked to her two assistants. Now, let's just bring a little sanity check on this. How important is this dropping of the noon? You know, in real life, okay, if you travel to Jordan and you forget to drop the noon and you say ukhtainaha and mudiranaha, you know, are people going to laugh at you? No, of course not. Okay, I mean, this is, you know, fairly higher level grammar. Okay, so in reality, if you forget to drop the noon, it may cost you a few points on a test here, and it will. But in reality, this is not a huge thing to remember. It's like, knowing how to properly use whom and who. What is far more important, though, and this is what we want to stress, is when you see it written this way, because anything written that's professionally done at all, newspaper, website, whatever, is going to follow this rule, is that when you see this, you know what it is. So if we were to ask you, if we were to just show you the word mudira'aha and say, how many people is this? 1, 2, 3 or more, you should be able to look at that and say, well, I know a noon got cut off. I know this aleph is the dual. It's 2. That is what you have to recognize. Now, it may seem kind of silly now, but when you're like reading a story that has a lot of different groups of people in it, if you can't keep that straight, then after a few sentences, you don't know who is whom, and you're lost. Okay? So let's look at one practice here. We have a lovely sentence. Okay? المدرسة تتكلم مع الطالبة ووالدها. The teacher speaking is talking with the student and, in this case, her father. Okay, parent-teacher conference. Probably not telling her what a great job she's doing. Okay, that's really great. Works by itself. So let's make some of these things dual. Okay, al-mudarasa. Now, first of all, we just want to make this dual. Instead of, this kid is in so much trouble, she's now having a conference with 2 teachers. Okay, so how do we make this 2 teachers? Take a moment. Think, what's the answer? No, it doesn't have a square root in it. Yeah, try again. Okay, hopefully you came up with this. If you didn't, pause and think about it for a second. Okay, so what function is this in the sentence? What case? It's clearly the subject. The teacher is doing the talking, and what's happening? The student is listening and getting in a lot of trouble. So this is the subject. So it should be in what case? The an case. It's feminine. Mudarissa. Mudarissatan. Samabuddha changes to ta. And of course we change the verb. It's not just one of them talking. Tatakallaman. Okay, and that's nice because it matches the verb form, matches the subject form, because who does a verb? A subject. Okay, great. So that was that. Okay, let's go back again. Same sentence. Now, this is going to be a bit strange. Let's say we have 2 students. We have 1 teacher again. But this teacher is talking to 2 students, and let's say they're sisters and they have the same parent. So what we're going to end up with is the teacher is talking to the 2 students and the parent. Okay, so now. Okay, so the question is going to be, how do we put this word in the dual? Take a moment to think about that. How do we do that? No, that's not nice. Okay, so it's going to be very similar. It's what case? Well, in this case, it's after a preposition. It's after ma, so we know it's going to be in the after preposition case. It's feminine, so the ending will be ain. المدرسة تتكلم مع الطالبتين ووالدهما. Okay, so this changed to 2 students, talibatain, because they're after a preposition. Now you say, how do I know that's 2 students? Because remember, talibateen is not the plural of student. Talibat is the plural, so we know this is 2. And then it's not just her parent, it's their parent, so we get the dual form of huma. Now this, if you forgot about this, that's okay. That was a little tricky thing, but this matches the dual here. But if you didn't notice that, okay, that's fine. All right, now again, let's go back. back to our original sentence. This time, and probably more realistically, we're going to double the parent. So instead of one parent, she's going to have two parents. مدرسة تتكلم مع الطالبة و her two parents. Okay, so what is this one going to be? Now let's think about this for a second. What case? Right. Okay, this is going to be in the object case, or it's actually after ma, so it's going to be in the object of a preposition case. They're the ones being spoken to, and we're going to make them dual. So notice what happens. We take this, and it becomes this, because this Walid, now Walid you know is father, but it basically means parent. Walid, Walida. Anything where the word is the same, with the exception of the tamabuta on the end, means it's a generic. Like Zawj, Zawja really means spouse, female spouse. Walid, Walida. Parent, male parent, female parent. Which of course means father and mother. But the word Walid means parent. So Walidaha is her one parent. Walideha, her two parents. Again, it's dual, but what has happened? It's got an aha after it, which puts it in an idafa. So while this one was talibatain, because it was not in an idafa, this one is walideha. Okay, now, you may say, well, that's a lot to remember, and it is, but it's easier to think that certain things always come in the dual. Okay, like parents. Most people don't have more than two parents. Okay, so walideha is walideya, walidena comes in dual. Let's look at this example here. This is our last example. Okay, so we have this situation. Ukhti sana'at al-fustan biyadaha. Okay, my sister sana'at, she made fustan, she made a dress, biyadaha. Yed, of course, is a hand. Okay, now if my sister did it all with one hand, and she may be that good, then this is fine. But probably she used two hands to make this dress. And this is another instance where dual is often used. You think about body parts. You have two hands, two eyes, two ears, right? Two legs, two arms, and so forth. So body parts are another one that is typically in the dual. So don't do the funny thing. I mean, the typical beginner mistake is everyone knows the word ein is an eye. The plural of ein is ayun. So if someone wants to say my eyes, they say ayuni, right? Which is funny because why? You don't have three or more eyes. You have how many? You have two. So this is, you have einain, okay, or einan, depending on the case. But you have two. So this is, so my sister, she didn't make this with three hands or more. She made it with two hands. So let's think about this. We want to correct this. Biyadaha is not exactly correct. She didn't make it with one hand. She made it with two hands. So this word yed should become, well, think about it. What's the case? Right, it's following a preposition be with. So we know what case it's going to be in. It's going to be in the object of a preposition, the a case. It's going to be two hands. And think about this. Yeddaha, that's what? That's an idafa, right? Her hand. So hopefully you got this. Okay? She made the fustan be yedeha. Yedeha. And this again it's important to remember because most people have yedain, right? Or yadan, depending on the case. Most people have einain or einan. So if you're going to talk about someone's hands, right, and that's a typical Arabic blessing, like if someone makes food or makes clothing for you, you say, bless your hands. Well, you say, bless your two hands, not bless your, three or more hands. Okay, so as always, we have fun exercises for you to practice this. Remember, this is important to know. It's good to be able to use this correctly, yes, but it is far, far, far more important to recognize it when you see it and know, if you look at this and you know, okay, that means two of this, and the noon has dropped off, that you recognize these things, you won't get confused. So, on behalf of my good friend Bear, we want to wish you all the best, and we will see you later. shukran,